Well, hello, everybody, and my name is John Barnwell. I'm here in the greater Detroit metropolitan area with Dr. Douglas Gabriel, who is one of the leading experts in the world regarding Waldorf education and the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner. I mean, it would take me quite a while just to share with you all of his accreditations, but he has a double BA in Anthroposophical Studies and British History, a double MA in Waldorf Education, Public School Administration, and a PhD in Philosophy and a PhD in Comparative Religion, a BA and an MA in Religious Formation, and a Doctor of Divinity, and a certified K through 12, certified as a Michigan School Administrator, a Waldorf School Administrator through Wayne State University and the Waldorf Institute of Mercy College. So he's a teacher trainer of 40 years experience. He's now retired with his wife, the brilliant Tyler Gabriel, who's just incredible. She makes a beehive look like it's standing still. And that's a good thing. She's truly industrious, and she's also an educator out of the Waldorf system and a naturopathic doctor. So you have some people here that have a very broad perspective on these things. And so that renders their opinions invaluable. And there's a lot of people out there that are unhappy with public education or looking for private education, like Waldorf, for example, or Montessori, or, so there are alternative ways of being able to bring your child into a wholesome breathing experience. Basically, what it is you inbreathe the world and then you give back to the world. And if we can do that in a harmonious way, then good things will be the end result. And so let's just hear what Dr. Douglas Gabriel says about the current state of affairs in education. How you doing, Douglas?
Doing great, John. This is going to be a great show. I'm going to laugh and I'm going to cry. I'm going to talk about old Waldorf and laugh and go into ecstasy and probably start singing some circle songs and dancing around the room. And then I'm going to talk about the modern day Waldorf, which unfortunately I have been slumbering for the last 10 years or so, just now and then being awakened by people in Waldorf schools calling me to ask for help. And I'm going to try to outline for you why it is an exorcist, ex-priest would get involved in a Waldorf school and really find that to be completely satisfying, much better than being in the Catholic Church. And that, basically I'm going to give a little history of my time in Waldorf in a big perspective, not like in a timeline, because it's just, it gets you can't explain these things if you're going to stay on the timeline. So we're going to have to do some time travel here. But really, as I've said before, I'm going to give a real quick summary here. When I was chosen to be the person to study Waldorf education and anthroposophy for the Catholic Church, I did end up writing a report on it. And you will now see that there are some ideas that have come into the Catholic Church, which obviously they got from Rudolf Steiner. And certainly in the parochial schools where I have taught, Catholic schools, there are Waldorf methods. But you see, you're not supposed to say Waldorf methods. Waldorf is all about training the teacher to be a model for the students who stays with the students from 1st through 8th grade, or in some systems 1st through 5th grade. But the point is, we've been talking about training the etheric body, and that's 1st through 7th grade, really, is in the American schools. But the timing is a little bit off. But the point is that I wanted to understand the human etheric body. And if you're going to do that, you need to watch a child grow basically from 1st through 8th grade, and you will see that they will teach you to observe the invisible etheric body as it descends from above their head, into their throat, into their heart, and then into their limbs as it goes through a number of births. A physical birth, the heart will go through, an etheric birth, an astral birth, a birth of the I am. And when you basically start watching children, it's the greatest thing you can do. recently I've become reacquainted with some people, some young people, relatives and such, that I haven't seen for a while. And when I see these people grown, it just blows my mind. You know, nobody can predict what a person's going to be. And it's just a delight, you know, from the moment of birth right up to the, you know, moment of death. Your human biography is a story that can only be told from your perspective and from as an individual. So that's what we're trying to do with Waldorf schools, as John said. We're trying to get them to breathe properly and to get habits that are good habits that they never understood were habits. They just do them. And so, as John has characterized a couple times my classroom, you could walk in my classroom and you'd think they didn't even know I was there. They're just doing their thing. They know exactly what to do at the exact right time because I sang the song for them that told them it's time to do something. And then they just do it because why? It's a habit. That's the same thing if you're on the path of initiation or the Holy Grail, questing for the Grail. You need to develop good habits. Those habits are determined by your ego and your astral body. And when they imprint into your etheric body, they become something that is just natural as breathing. And that's what we want to do. We want to have the children in an environment where they have no constrictions and where we teach them the world literature. For instance, the students I taught, they learned at least a dozen different creation myths. In the end, we have them write their own creation myth. So the Waldorf school in the old days they took in everyone who could pay. And I wrote a lot of grants. Matter of fact, I wrote more grants than probably anybody else in Waldorf in my years. And I was on the Association of Waldorf School of North America, which I'm going to refer to a lot. And that's called AWSNA. I'll repeat that. AWSNA is the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America. And in the early days, when I was a Waldorf teacher, they were just kind of getting their foothold. They didn't have a business manager. They didn't have a director. And it was a very loose organization for summertime conferences, which were absolutely marvelous, by the way. The best people in the world were brought in for those summertime conferences. And in my day, there was, eventually 27 schools that were Waldorf schools that were what is called accredited from the Waldorf Association of North America, AWSNA. And I raised the funds to create the first business manager position and to pay the first director because there was never really a formal director. So I was deeply connected to that. And when I got into Waldorf, why did I do that? Well, I was leaving the Catholic Church. And right in that Waldorf school, as I've described before, there was the Christian community. So I became a server, an altar boy. And that made me very happy because I love the Eucharist. And so here I am. I'm in my own school that I'm working in, which I started working in from the first time. As soon as I got to Detroit, I said, I'm going to be a Waldorf teacher. I need to get in the school. So I would mow the grass. I would work in the library. I would do supervision. I would do anything that they needed. You had some dirty work to do, I'm the guy. So I got in there. They got to know me very well. And after years of going to school, I went to the Waldorf Institute for 11 years and eventually got a BA, as John said, in anthroposophical studies and history, and an MA in Waldorf education and school administration, and all the certifications you can get and all the different trainings and all that. And of course, I joined as a member of the inner group that ran the school called the College of Teachers. I was asked to join the pedagogical section, which is directly connected to anthroposophy in Dornoch, the international headquarters. So I would often travel to Europe and eventually, because I was on the business management team and the Speakers Bureau, I gave lots of talks in schools all over America and got to know literally every single one of the 27 schools intimately, helped them with their budgets, helped them with their problems. And everyone knew that in those years, that you could call me and I would help you in some way. But also, and this is a brag point, and I have to make this because later on, what I'm going to say, you need to understand what John started this show with, which I didn't know he was going to do. Yes, I am an expert in Waldorf education. Yes, I have trained more teachers than probably anybody else, certainly in America. Literally, I've trained public school teachers to become Waldorf teachers and created a curriculum called, or a philosophy called intuitive learning, which, by the way, you can go to the Eternal Curriculum site and you can get a copy of that book for free, PDF, as well as a copy of the first book that I wrote when people begged me after seeing the way I taught first grade. They said, please help new Waldorf teachers. So in this book is everything you'd need to start a first grade in Waldorf school, as well as some other things. All the poems and stuff, plays I've written, songs, all the stuff that was for the children. And so I eventually, became very popular in the Waldorf movement, both here in America and in Europe, and was used as a consultant, and also was the number one fundraiser. Literally, grants that I wrote are still being used, and programs I created are still being used in the AWSNA accredited schools. AWSNA accredits Waldorf schools. There are lots of Waldorf schools, but there's only a certain number that are accredited. And there, at that time, as I've told you, I had been given this task to study Waldorf education and anthroposophy. So I went to all the places in America that I knew about. In those days, there was no internet, so it didn't mean, these places were hard to find. As hard as finding Rudolf Steiner's books. You may never run across Rudolf Steiner's books, except if you went to the Mayflower and talked to John.
Yeah, I think to contextualize it, and people that have been listening to us for some time probably know this already, but when Douglas was with the Catholic Church, he was selected to be one of their two experts on Rudolf Steiner anthroposophy, theosophy, and all of that, and that he was taken to a cage, literally a cage, locked up, and he went in, and there's all these books, and he went in and he read them all. And but it's the practice of the church, and has been from time immemorial, to have within the Jesuit order of which he was involved at that time, have two experts on every subject known to man. And so that's what they do. They work in twos, and that's why a lot of people don't really notice them so much, because there's only a couple guys, standing next to Kublai Khan or whatever. And so the sphere of influence is fascinating, but then to realize that his real mission in life was through the work of Rudolf Steiner, and leave that order without taking the later vows of the Jesuit order. And I have to make that clear, because people have brought that into question. I said, well, yeah, he went through a lot of training, but did not take the vows, so he's not beholden to them. And he has since moved on to anthroposophy and its related fields of study. So anyways, continue on.
That's right. And I was a Benedictine, so really they couldn't give me the final orders for the Jesuit. And so they just used me, and because they, knew that I was into all these things, they said, we need to know about this. So when you go into Catholic schools these days and you see them pull out a box flute and start playing it, that was me. I made sure that the number one thing in Waldorf education, which is playing a box flute from the time you're in kindergarten, if you can, with a pentatonic flute, all the way through, actually develops your brain better than anything else. Anything to do with moving your fingers all at once with your breath and in rhythm and with the beat, and that's really the number one educational force there is. So anyway, yes, I had traveled all over, and as I've told the story, I went to the Teacher Training Institute in Spring Valley, and it closed the day that class was supposed to start. We were all sitting in class, and the teacher was gone. I went up to his house. He'd cleaned out his house overnight. That was Rene Carrito and Marilyn Carrito, and they moved to California to start the Teacher Training Institute in Sacramento. But I'd also gone to Sacramento, and there at the Fair Oaks Rudolf Steiner College, again, I'm sitting in the chair, day one. Franklin Cain's supposed to come in to start teaching. Someone comes in and says, Franklin Cain ran away with the secretary. There's no program. Like, oh my. So accidentally, a friend, I went to his house in Ann Arbor, and I saw a brochure for the Waldorf Institute in Detroit. And I pick it up and I say, what's this? He goes, oh, that's a Teacher Training Institute in Detroit. Don't you know about that? That's how I came to Detroit. But when I did, I had to decide. I decided I wasn't going to live in a Jesuit house or go to a Jesuit school. I was going to go to Mercy College and live in Indian Village right next to the Waldorf school, because basically it became my family. Just like a priest's diocese, their parish is really their family, right? Well, became my family. And I knew every child's name in the whole school. I knew all the parents. I went to every meeting. Nothing happened at the school that I didn't get involved with, because I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. Loved the international connections, loved the anthroposophy, loved the music, the art, the choral recitation. By the time the children get to 8th grade, they perform an uncut Shakespeare play by memory. And usually the Waldorf teacher memorizes the whole play because they're the prompter. Certainly I did. So this is a form of education that was a bastion of freedom, a home of spiritual protection for children, and a place where their health and their well-being was always put forward as the number one mission.
Now, during your time associated with the Detroit Waldorf School, I remember back in the day that their symphony would like win the competition like every year. It was just like, it was absolutely astounding that they just kept ruling it. And people have to, if you take this in context with the conversation that we've been having, you'll notice that we keep talking about the breath and talking about the ethers and talking about the etheric body, and that those are all related subjects. And when you get into that, and then you get into what I've said last week or the other day about the mysteries of Apollo of the north and the mysteries of Dionysius in the south. Well, in the south, you have the flutes, right? That's like that recorder. And in the north, you have the harp or lyre, the stringed instrument. And it's a different kind of modality that is tied into that whole mystery of the etheric body that can also be developed through the study of history, which is so central to the unfoldment of the curriculum in Waldorf education. Douglas, could you share us a little about that?
Oh, absolutely. If you are training your breath, then essentially you are bringing the spirit in, and it is the natural breath, not a training of the breath from yogic practices. And I've done lots of those, and they can be very dangerous. It's a breath that is absolutely natural. It's a breath that comes out when you're singing a song. It's the matter of fact, when you see a little child and they in a Montessori school and they take down what they call the works and they start stacking this thing up, and then they knock it down, and they stack it up, and they knock it down, they stack 26 times. They'll do it in a row. And after that, they'll be done. And when they are, they'll go, why? Because they had just learned a concept through their hands, through gross motor control, and it goes in. This is what we do with Waldorf. Everything has to be done first. You have to do it. There is no teaching to the head. So when we teach a class in Waldorf, it's all by memory. So every day I had to prepare a new lesson, and a Waldorf teacher who has a class from 1st through 8th grade never has a moment, because they're preparing their new curriculum all the time. Because what are they teaching the children? Is it the curriculum? No. So it doesn't matter that you might get the Waldorf curriculum and you think you can implement it. That's not what you're teaching. What you're teaching, according to Rudolf Steiner, is who you are. So is your breath in peace? Is every word that comes from your mouth being carefully delivered? Is every gesture considered to be a sacred entrance into the child's etheric body? Is every single thing in the room building their etheric body, and it needs to be in perfect order and beautifully arranged and colorful? Yes. And who is that? That's who the teacher is. So that's what you teach. You teach who you are. Now, I want to add this also. From the first time that I was in 1st grade, the first time, the Eastern Michigan University found out about my class somehow, and they said that all of their teacher training students had to go through my class to graduate. They had to come observe. And I've told you this before. Most of them were crying at the end, right? And they're just, oh, what beautiful thing I've ever seen. You know, why? Because the children were allowed to be free, but within a structure that I had created, I had memorized. I knew how to do the dances. I could do the things that I was having them to do, and I did it right in front of them. There was no effort in learning. True learning, there's no effort whatsoever in it. It isn't rote memory. It has nothing to do with rote memory. It's when you were doing that dance and you were reciting those words, well, the words went with the dance. There isn't a question of, I want you to memorize the song about the squirrel going up the tree. No, that isn't the way it works. So in a Waldorf school, the first 45 minutes, usually in the lower grades, you do circle dances. You move your desk aside, the room is cleared out, you hold hands, and you do circle dances, singing, rhythmic dancing, rhythmic exercises that if you saw them would blow your mind. There's ways to teach fractions through rhythmic exercises, counting forward and backward. There's ways to teach everything. As a matter of fact, if you need to teach something and you can't have them do an activity before, then you're probably missing the point of what you're supposed to be teaching. So the Waldorf School is all about action. All the children do end up playing a symphonic instrument in a symphony, as John mentioned, and they become virtuosos in their area. We have usually children who are literally incredible, amazing virtuosos who then go on to really be musicians. Others who like the drama so much. Others who love the sculpture and the clay and the molding and the things we build, and others love the art. And so every child is allowed to go whatever direction they want, but all of them are working together as one. I can literally tell you, I can swear on a Bible right now, in all the years I taught, there was never one fight in my classroom. Not one. Now, there was a battle on the playground once when the girls built a fort and the boys built a fort. But look, the boys built a fort. What were they asking for? A battle. If I was out there, I wouldn't let them build a fort. And then they defended the fort. So the girls built a fort. So a battle happens. It's like, literally the only thing ever happened. And it was just, they were yelling at each other. So big deal. Nobody touched anybody. So in fact, whatever expectation that teacher has, that's what the child can do and more.
Yeah, if you look at what Dr. Gabriel just said, where you do it and then you talk about it. Well, what does that look like? Were you to go study piano with Friedrich Chopin, for example, or Mozart, what would they do? They would sit down and they would play something. And then they would have you sit down and play that. And then the discussion would begin. So it's all about that training of the will and bringing it into the realm of rhythmic activity, that you can build this whole matrix of memory and consciousness. It's just absolutely elegant, the way that Rudolf Steiner's put this together, and to see it become misunderstood because of people not getting the fundamental issue, and that has to do with this whole idea of the breath, and as spiritus in Latin, that's breath. And so you look in Scripture and what and God breathed life into man. So that's the key. That's the center of the whole equation. And if you look at an infant and watch it breathing, you'll see that its abdomen is going up and down. It's breathing from its diaphragm. And people, as they become stressed out and complicated, they tend to go towards shallow breathing. Now, your whole relationship to the etheric world is through the breath. And you can hold a mirror under your nose at different times of the day, and the steam will produce a different shape depending on which ether cycle is occurring at that time. And I've had people do this time and time again. I was trying to get to the pulmonary department over at, but I got busy with other things. But that's a really important and fundamental thing. And that's exactly at the root of so much of what Douglas is trying to refer to with this rhythmic unfoldment. And in ancient cultures, you would learn the lore and like Homer, and it's in hexameter. What is that? That's the breath rhythm. So this is very key. If you can just take these little morsels that he's sharing and share it with your family or even with yourself. This is not limited to students in a school. Douglas and I didn't go to Waldorf schools.
Yes, and Steiner gave a few interesting indications. Not many people follow through on some of these, but he said the best thing would be is if the teacher walked to school with the children. So every morning, if there wasn't inclement weather, I took them for a long walk around the block. Because he also says that as you're walking, that's when real thinking can happen. So, and then I worked with Dr. Trouta Page, one of the greatest healing curative doctors in anthroposophy. And we worked with the most severe children with handicaps. And she, as soon as they got off the bus, she'd run them up and down the steps until they sweat. And then they'd go in the room and they could learn once they were sweating. So until you have danced your morning away, you're really not ready to sit down in a chair. That's why scoliosis happens so much with children in chairs. And so I take them for a walk, and then we do violin together. And as John said, we use what's called now the Suzuki method, which is simply like with the recorder. I'd play the song. They'd pick up the recorder, and literally some of them played it perfectly the first time. I know it's hard to believe. Or I would say, here is this poem I want us to learn. And then I'd recite the poem. And by golly, by the second or third day, I better not make a mistake because it would upset their etheric body and they would laugh at me, because why? Everything we treated it almost as a religious, solemn ritual. And that's really what it was. It was basically calling their angels in to help them and using those magical forces of the etheric. Now, in Detroit, lots of teachers came through the classroom. I didn't mind how many people were at the back of the classroom. Sometimes there were 50 people at the back of the classroom. And then I started teaching. I'd go out. I did presentations in colleges and stuff and education departments. And then pretty soon, I even got invited to be a staff member of the Waldorf Institute while I was still teaching. And became, of course, I was like Werner's protege. So I started teaching courses there. But I also taught courses at the other schools, Waldorf Teacher Training Institutes, in summer courses and in conferences and so on and so forth. So basically, I've taught at most of those places. And let's see, how did this happen? When I went to Hawaii, I opened a teacher training institute that went on for years, 5 years. And then when we opened the first charter school in Detroit, with Dr. June and Rob Hutchinson. There was a teacher training institute there I started when we did Oasis Academy, which became literally the number one school. John worked there. Number one school in Detroit public school system was Oasis Academy for a number of years, where I was the principal. And I started a teacher training and a parent training institute there. So, and then in Hawaii, same thing. Everywhere I went, I always started teacher training institutes, because if you don't train the teachers, you can't come up with the staff. Now, let me say something about teacher training. If in my day, back in the good old Waldorf days, when everybody was singing and dancing and hopping around, playing a recorder, they used to say, you can always tell it's a Waldorf student by the recorder hanging from their lower lip. That's what they'd say, because all classes played the recorder. I taught recorder in the high school, okay? Everyone played the recorder. Why? Because it's the number one tool to increase all academic skills, period. And I demonstrated this in public schools, in the Academy of Detroit schools, at Oasis, at all the different places I've worked. I bring this stuff in and I train the teachers, and whether Waldorf likes it or not, you can teach some Waldorf methods, which will help. But if you don't teach them anthroposophy, if you don't change their worldview so that they can actually see who that child is that's in front of them and get rid of their own bad education and their own programming, then they're really not going to turn out to be that model that you want the students to follow. So for a whole year, you had to go through what was called the orientation year. And you studied Steiner in all, in science and medicine, in philosophy, in religion, and all this stuff. You study a lot of Steiner so that you get a perspective. And then you have to do a year of training as a Waldorf teacher. And then you have to do a placement. And then if you're going to be a public school teacher like I became also, you had to do that also on top of that. And then later, of course, I got certification as administrator, both Waldorf and public. So I was able to move between all the different types of schools and infiltrate the public school system and bring them some methodologies that really made children happy to go to school.
There you go. Perhaps we can get you to elaborate on the efficacy of jump rope. I mean, it's something. When was the last time you saw a kid outside jumping rope? But yet that's a tremendous help in developing the rhythmic aspect of the child to be able to receive learning.
Oh, absolutely. I started in Hawaii, something that caught on throughout Waldorf schools all over the world. It was called, what was it called? Circus skills. I hired a person who had worked in a circus to teach them to ride unicycles and tall unicycles and to juggle and to do all this circus stuff, because why? That's training of the will. And if you develop a capacity to learn to juggle, you can then transfer that capacity to other things. So yes, we had, I was always in the schools I was in doing some experiments a little bit, but never would I ever say in my life, as we hear people say today who haven't gone through the orientation year, they're Waldorf teachers, they might have gotten their Waldorf certification online, which I'm sorry, but that's an oxymoron. You can't get Waldorf training online, and you can't go to a Waldorf school online, but you can get some of the methods. And that's why if you go to our site, Eternal Curriculum, and by the way, that's the name of a book, Eternal Curriculum. Why is it eternal? Because it teaches the etheric body, and the etheric body is essentially eternal while you're alive. And it's also the memory of everyone who ever came before you and your ancestry. And so the Eternal Curriculum, and that's the Eternal Curriculum page you see when you go to the website, and discovering the ethers. Because why? If you're going to be a Waldorf teacher, as I've said before, you have to understand the ethers, or you can't understand the child's etheric body, which is their body that you're teaching, except first through eighth grade or thereabouts. So you can go to that site and you'll find there a thing I had developed with public school teachers. I've trained hundreds and hundreds of public school teachers in Waldorf methods, and I created a book called Intuitive Learning. And it matches up Waldorf practices with what schools call best practices. Basically, it's the newest theory, and there's always new educational theories. They just love that. They forget the old. So right there, the two books that would be needed, the one on the left, Eternal Curriculum, is for parents, teachers, and students, because you have to educate all three of them at once. And most parents who put their child in a Waldorf school, they come and they watch it and they go, I wish I could have done this. Well, they can do it. They need to follow along with their child, reading the adult selections that I put in this book, so that you understand that culture that is being offered to the children. For instance, in a fifth grade, well, let me just go through this quickly. In kindergarten, we teach Russian, German fairy tales, Chinese fairy tales, Indian fairy tales. By the time they get out of kindergarten, they're practically world citizens. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Then in second grade, you're teaching legends and big stories, fables, things like that. Third grade, you're teaching the Old Testament stories. And as you do it, you enter into what it was like, and you actually celebrate with the children Jewish holidays. Okay, we're not a Jewish school, not a Christian school. They're a non-denominational, generally speaking, unless an intentional Waldorf school decided to be something else. But the point is that they literally live the life of the Old Testament. And then in the fourth grade, they learn about the Norse myths, either through the Elder Edda and the Poetic Edda, or you can also teach them the Kalevala. And everything, that's just the world literature. Then in fifth grade, hang on to your hat. We've talked about this before. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. The development of the individual recapitulates the development of humanity. Well, Steiner's going back into even before recorded history. He tells you to teach them ancient Indian versus lifestyle, absolutely get them for a one block period to immerse themselves in the ancient Indian period. And then after that, the ancient Persian period. After that, Egypt, Chaldea, Babylon. After that, Greek and Roman. After that, moving towards the Renaissance, and then moving towards modern times. So by the time the child finishes 8th grade, they have literally been taught world literature their entire education life. And they have entered deeply into these things. So when I hear people saying anything about Waldorf education, and now unfortunately they're being accused of being white-centric, or education for white people that excludes the people literally in AWSNA's literature that they call Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. Well, think of that. There is new policies in the AWSNA Waldorf schools that literally abnegate everything that I worked for 40 years, and the thousands of teachers I've trained and the millions of dollars I've raised are now being abnegated by their new policies from AWSNA to the accredited Waldorf schools. And I'm going to give you more. There's the Waldorf education. That's the AWSNA site, the Association of Waldorf Schools in North America. That document right there. And if you click on the first blue line, you'll go to a deeper document, which I'm quoting in the article in the show notes. And I'm simply taking their words, and literally their words have divorced them from Rudolf Steiner. They literally say the Rudolf Steiner is a racist, basically imply he's a sexist, clearly say that he's what nowadays is called white supremacy, but basically a white-centric, European-oriented. Okay, who are these people that are running AWSNA that haven't noticed that Waldorf schools are in every country in the world, serving every color, race, everyone? It's insanity to say that Waldorf is not a universally global, non-denominational school that is a bastion still for freedom. It was when I was doing it, a bastion for freedom, a place where children are protected, and where absolutely I wrote so many grants to bring in those very people, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color, into Waldorf schools throughout America, to now have people at the top level of AWSNA saying that Waldorf schools have a history of doing basically horrible things. You can read the article. I'm just using their words. So they basically divorced themselves from Rudolf Steiner's teaching, called him names, said that the association accredited Waldorf schools are white-centric. Well, that's completely absurd. Because if you're going to say that, and you're going to use what they now use, which is called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, then why would you set up new policies that are part of the accreditation process, where the board had to now add, and they use an acronym, BIPOC, Black, Brown, Indigenous, People of Color. So what is that? BIPOC. So now the new standards are BIPOC has to rule your staff. You have to prove to the accreditation agency, AWSNA, that you have people of color on your staff, Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color on your staff. And whatever you do, you need to be prejudiced against whites because they're bringing in the white-centric curriculum, which is sheer insanity. That's a lie. That's disinformation. So how do these people get to the top of being the executive team of AWSNA? Usually we put the oldest retired Waldorf teachers who had been around forever and proven who they are in those positions so that they could have some wisdom to help these schools. Now they're mandating, I'm sorry to have to say this, but I have been called in the last few years from the last teachers leaving the Waldorf school who are actually students of mine, students of Steiner, who say these new policies have driven them out of the school, and or they get fired, because Waldorf has been doing this for many, many years. They'll, at age 21, when the school's 21, they'll split down the middle, and the Christian anthroposophists, they have to start a new school. And the people who then simply go with Steiner's method stay in the school. So now we're seeing this happen in all of the AWSNA Waldorf schools. And so people have been calling in for years saying to me, Douglas, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give you a report. I'm the last person here. I can't take it anymore. We went around the table the other night and somebody said, well, right here it says in in our policies and procedures that we need to study Rudolf Steiner. And so they took a vote. Who wants to study Steiner? One hand went up. After that, then they said, well, let's talk about what we can do to go beyond Steiner. So they went around the table and each of them told their version of their religious or spiritual inclination, which was everything under the sun, many things that are so opposite Steiner, it's ridiculous. And when it came to him, he basically said, I'm sticking with Steiner. And after what I hear here, this is it. At the end of this year, I'm gone. And he was running the school and he was their top teacher. This has happened throughout all the Waldorf schools that have called me and told me this. And then the other day, I get a call from a very upset parent from a Waldorf school. And the parent says that they went in and the school demanded that they put down, in some cases, the entire tuition up front. In this case, it was half the tuition because that's all he could do. Puts his child in the kindergarten. On the first day he walks in, and here's a purple-haired, over 6 foot tall man with a beard in a dress, showing his hairy legs, who is in a squeaky voice demanding that everyone must call him Miss Lori. So, of course, he wouldn't even put his child in the classroom. He went straight to the office and said, I demand a refund. And they said, you don't get a refund. Look right here, you signed. So I get calls like this now, and it's really disturbing. And recently I got some more calls from some Waldorf schools that have intentional communities. And I've been working with schools in this area who have their own homeschooling and little schools and little kindergartens that are Waldorf method. But I'm telling you right now, the world during the Constant Soul era, when Rudolf Steiner said the normal feeling would be homelessness, helplessness, a feeling of anxiety and worry about the overwhelming nature of the future coming towards you. So that's a standard feeling. Now, with children right now, look at the statistics. We have them in our articles. The longer a child is on their phone or their computer, the more likely they're going to go into depression and suicidal ideation, if not suicidal action. And so we have to protect in these bastions of freedom in Waldorf schools who actually still follow Steiner and haven't called him a racist and a sexist and a Nazi, literally. Not AWSNA didn't call him a Nazi, but in Europe, at the headquarters of anthroposophy, in the Great Hall of Steiner's Goetheanum, Second Goetheanum, they allowed people to come with 125 accusations that Steiner was a anti-Semite, a Nazi, and a racist. Not one single anthroposophist in Dornach defended those attacks, and the executive committee allowed it to happen in the Great Hall. They came, they bashed Steiner, and not one word was said in their defense. Now, there's also been articles written like this, and there's been people like Peter Sotomayor, who myself and James Hines and other people have argued with him online because he thinks he's now the ultimate, commentator on Rudolf Steiner. And he says Steiner's a racist. He's a Nazi. He's a sexist. He's a horrible person. And yet he is the person doing an annotated version of Steiner's collected work with commentary. He hates Steiner, and I could go into great detail, but literally those lies have been used by people like Waldorf Watch and Waldorf Parents and people who are bashing Steiner, telling people, take your children out of Waldorf schools. It's a cult. It's a this and it's a that. Well, you know what? There's only been like probably 5 anthroposophists I know who have stood up to those people and shown them in Steiner's own words that what they said isn't true. And that's what I've done in the show note article, is use Steiner's words to show that the accusations coming from AWSNA, the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America and accredited Waldorf schools, have taken this recommended policy, which is part of accreditation. It's not recommended, it's demanded. And they have their own. And now people have sent me some of these ridiculous documents that have now replaced your standard non-discriminatory statement in your mission, in your statement of who your school is, with your mission statement. Well, I'm afraid that if you have children wearing masks, then you have not done one speck of research. I am still looking, and I've given this challenge out to people for a few years now. Find me one single piece of research that shows that masks ever helped anyone, including doctors in the operation room. No, the 54 that I have found, including Tony Fauci's doctor, he's not a doctor, he's a murderer. Tony Fauci's document states that they do nothing but harm. He did another study a number of years ago that stated that the people who died in the Spanish flu, more than 51% of them died because they were wearing masks. So if you're an educator and you don't know that, and you're part of mandating masks on children, you are doing the opposite of Waldorf education, which is to free their breath. The masks give pneumonia. This is what all the studies say. It traps the very things that need moisture to grow, and then you're breathing that culture into your lung and you get pneumonia. That's why there's so many cases of pneumonia and flu since masks were used.
Well, yeah, all you have to do is go back, watch some old British movies, and people would die of consumption, they called it, right? And that they had a lung condition and they succumbed to that. Well, that was before there was developments within dental work so that people could take care of their teeth. Well, if you don't take care of your teeth and your teeth are starting to rot and gums getting infected and then you breathe it in, your days are numbered. And so that the mortality rate for people was greatly affected through the development of dental hygiene. And so it's such an obvious thing. And then to think that you can put on a mask, trap all the bacteria and have them breathe it into their lungs, plus elevate the carbon dioxide levels in the body, is just absolutely shows you the level of entrainment that's going on in public media and education. But that's kind of what you should expect in these kinds of scenarios, because remember, the Fabian socialists, their logo, their symbol is a wolf with a sheep's wool over his back. So the general way in which this type of impulse, that's really, you can look back to the French Revolution and you'll find that that's what this leads back to ultimately, is that you have this whole idea that people are going to create a overall system of control and bring things into being. And in Europe, they're in a different relationship because they never had what we had here with our development of the three branches of government and the Constitution and all that. We don't want to go too far down there, but I'm just pointing it out that we have an opportunity that is far greater than our brothers and sisters over in Britain and in Europe and elsewhere, that we have an opportunity to rectify the situation through the capability of freedom. And if people do not work towards saving those freedoms, then they will go away. And then you can end up with scenarios that resemble what's described by Anatoly Golitsyn, the former KGB officer who warns how communist deception threatens the survival of the West. I mean, that was put out a long time ago. And there's a great many other supporting documents. Herbert Marcuse, the critique of pure tolerance. Oh, we can't tolerate that. So, but if you look at their document, the Waldorf Association you're talking about of North America, it's like it's lifted right out of a policy document of an NGO. Why does it look like that? Because it was. Okay. So then the first question that comes to mind is, well, is that NGO providing them with funds? That's the first thing you have to look into. And because they are a 501c3, you have a right to look in and see what's going on with the finances. So that, I think that's going to be the trail that many people that want to look at this more closely can do to kind of give the test if you're thinking of going in, having your child go into Waldorf education, or you yourself want to be a teacher. It doesn't hurt to look at the 501c3 and see who's providing the funding.
That's exactly right. You've mentioned that and a couple others, and I hadn't thought about that. But yes, the executive team of AWSNA may simply be getting some grants, and so they must come into compliance with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is basically the same thing as critical race theory merged with what's it called? Economic social governance, ESG. So if you merge, DEI is actually, it's a wonderful ideology. But to then come and to say, well, we first have to admit that the Waldorf schools have committed horrible crimes against these people consciously, that's not true. It's the opposite. Not only that, why would anybody, with what we've seen as the response to ESG in terms of the corporate world, that they get boycotted? Here's the deal. Why? This is what's happening. Very small minorities, literally, 1% of America, less than 1% of America for some of these groups, are now in control of the majority. Very small minorities are now in control of the majority. And to get in control of the majority, they have to make the majority the enemy. And now that's white people. Well, first off, there's no such thing as a white person. And I've never met a Caucasian in my life, okay? Never met any trans Caucasians, never met anybody from the Caucasians, and I've never seen a white person. There's no such thing. I am a color too. As a matter of fact, I'm American Indian. Could you tell that I'm a red man? And if I was, so what? The point is, yes, we were horrible to the American Indians, and to make reparations to them, yes. We should also make reparations to all the African slaves that we brought over here. But remember, we didn't bring them over here. The British, the Dutch, and the Africans brought them over, okay? And when they got here, what did they meet? Well, they met Indian tribes, Native American Indian tribes, who had, all of them, almost all, I think all but one or two, have slaves from other tribes. So who are we going to pay these reparations to? How about the English? How about the Irish who came over during the potato famine? How about the English, Irish, Dutch, and Germans who were told that they were going to be itinerant farmers, and they turned into slaves and they worked them to death in the Caribbean and in America? What about the fact that every single nation on the face of the earth has been enslaved at some time? Now, that's horrible. That's why I became a Waldorf teacher. So that I can't tell you, I was trying to remember how many African American children I had in my class of sometimes, 30 children, let's just say 30 children. I don't remember. I never saw someone as black or white. I had Asian children. I had Chinese children. I had Indian children. I had every type of children. And not only that, in a Waldorf school, it wasn't only a bastion of freedom that was color blind. We didn't see color. As a matter of fact, if they were color, then we'd go, oh, and you don't have money to come in? Oh, go see Dr. Gabriel. He's written a grant for you. And there were a number of children who paid nothing in my class. They got free scholarships, right? So the fact that there's sins of the father, no, there's no sins of Waldorf. That's complete nonsense. So what we need to do now is people need to use their discernment. And just like one of the top reasons that people put their children in Waldorf school in the past was because they honored vaccine exemptions. And I know I just said vaccine and I said exemption. There's philosophical and religious exemptions that used to exist. They're being thrown out now in many states. They don't exist in California. You can be put in jail if you don't get your child with the full schedule of vaccinations for your child. In Waldorf schools, no one even asked. Your child could be vaccinated, not vaccinated, it didn't matter. Why? Because we left the freedom of decision for your child's health to the right people, the parents. And we made sure that we exercised those parents' right to have an exemption. Nowadays, no. As a matter of fact, during the 2 years of the pharmaceutical World War III, we saw not only masks, but we saw Waldorf schools build classrooms outside. For a virus that was absolutely so negligible to hurt children that it can barely be calculated, they built classrooms outside, wore masks, and mandated all vaccinations. I'm sorry, that's not Waldorf education. And so what I have done in the show notes, I have, and it will mean nothing to most of these people, but I've divorced myself from the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America and their accredited Waldorf schools, because as far as I know, every one of them is in compliance with this, and there's nothing more I can do for them. All I can do is say, hey, we created a site called Eternal Curriculum. You can go there, you can see podcasts, you can get the methodology from the book called Intuitive Learning. You can learn how to teach first grade from the spirit of childhood. You can see the whole curriculum and have the overview with the Eternal Curriculum. And if you want to go deeper, which you should study what your child's etheric body is and do that through the Eternal Curriculum. So these books I created as basically people begged me to do it. And so because they needed it. And so I've done that. And now I literally get messages and calls and stuff from people saying, thank you, Dr. Gabriel. We do a homeschool. We read your books. Please do a second grade through eighth. You did the first grade and you gave us a little bit for second and third, but do the rest. I can't do the rest. It's too complicated. You're teaching who you are. So that's why I have to write all these other books and all these articles to help people understand that only when you have a spiritual worldview can you help the child develop a spiritual worldview.
I believe it was Dr. Rudy who said there's 3 things that I want you to know as Waldorf teachers: anthroposophy, anthroposophy, anthroposophy.
Yeah, that was Theo Bergen on his way leading out of, he and his wife left the Detroit Waldorf School. They were the founders. And we were all like, 3 things, good, write it down. And so after that, we're going, yeah, well, for us in those days, there were only a few people who were not really studying Rudolf Steiner, but they still gave it lip service so that they could go to the conferences and, be a Waldorf teacher. But nowadays, literally, I don't know a school that still has one of the old gray-haired Waldorf teachers who have the experience to bring some wisdom to what's going on here. But what's going on here is not wise. This is what is called wokeism. It's woke. These people who are doing this believe they are woke. They're awakened to the sensitivity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then they write a policy that is the opposite of that. And so I don't understand. But then I don't know that you can understand a person who adheres to the woke agenda.
Well, I mean, seriously, all you have to do is develop the capacity to think, and these weighted arguments that they're giving just fall apart. It doesn't make any sense. You can't even get to the end of the paragraph without having your head explode. I mean, seriously, reparation. Okay, let's get into a little bit of the reparations thing. So you have Abraham. Abraham's married to Sarah, and but later on, he decides that, or actually Sarah decided to let her handmaiden, which was her slave, by the way, Hagar, bear a child for Abraham. So does that mean that all the descendants of Abraham now owe reparations to all the descendants of Hagar, which is, all the Ishmaelites, which is all the Arab tribes and that whole branch of the human family? I mean, at what point do we get to where this all becomes something just absolutely ridiculous? I remember going to a meeting one time, and there was a bunch of people from Detroit, and it was when I was at the school with you, but it was a group of mothers and all that, and some teachers, but they were all, I was the only non person of color in the room, if under their designation. But anyways, they got into this whole thing about, oh, well, who is your family? And they started interviewing me about my family. And mind you, I have members of my family that came here in 1617. I'm from the branch that came in 1630. But we came in into Philadelphia, and so never owned any slaves. So but they were trying to tell me, because of my family, that I'm included in that whole group that should have a sense of responsibility for what their ancestors did. And I'm thinking, this is just bizarre. I mean, seriously.
I'm Cherokee Indian. My grandfather's father was on the Trail of Tears. I tried to get my children recognized as being 1/4 American Indian, and I couldn't because of the persecution still going on to the Indian people. Now, let's see, indigenous people, yes, so they get included, but when do you see anybody being proactive about that? That there's quotas for certain groups, but there's no quotas for the other groups.
Yeah, and my mother's family, I mean, geez, they came over from Ireland in the late 1800s. So how does that play into it? Are they responsible? But see, I used to teach history at the Waldorf teacher training program. I taught a master's course, and it became clear to me that there were a great many of my students that really weren't prepared for the course. They hadn't had the pre education to be able to really enter into the material fully, and so that's the state of the way in which they're trying to transfer ideas into people's heads today, that they don't have a format of education like what Dr. Gabriel was so generous to describe to us here. And so consequently, they can't act out of that developed understanding. And so, when I went to a talk about ancient Persia, I only found 2 people in the room that could find it on a map. I mean, seriously. And this is a master's program. So I just want to say that Waldorf education was meant to take up the task that should have been done by the parents in the first place.
And my intent here with the show note article called The Demise of the AWSNA accredited Waldorf schools is to basically encourage other people to stand up and make your voice be heard and get the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America to drop their DEI and to fire the people who came up with this. And that also means the representatives who went to those meetings that bought into this, and to basically turn it back into what Steiner meant it to be, which is an all-inclusive, universal, cosmopolitan curriculum that puts the children first and teaches them and encourages them to love all people everywhere.
I know we're out of time, and this has been a very special episode because we've finally gotten to the core of Dr. Gabriel's specialty, and that's that he was one of the leading individuals in the domain of Waldorf education in North America and the world too, I would say. But so with that being said, I want to thank everybody for showing up here with us, and thanks to Tyla to host this adventurous task that we've taken up. And we'll see you next time.